بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We're talking about the Ihya and in particular about the second book in the Ihya and a chapter within that book, and it is called the chapter on seclusion. And last week we spoke about the various opinions of people who were protagonists and others who were antagonists. There are multiple layers here that we can explore if you have the time and the inclination. It's going to run us into weeks, and hopefully we still have the enthusiasm and the energy to do so, because like I told you previously, there are 3 or 4 books that are pivotal in the development of Islam's intellectual base, and the Ihya is certainly one of them. And in terms of developing an understanding of what Islam is, there is perhaps no scholar more prominent and significant than Imam al-Ghazali. And so we have to spend time looking at Imam al-Ghazali, because when we deal with his biography, we are in a sense dealing with the biography of all Muslims. He represents that. Very few scholars do that. If you're looking at Imam Bukhari, for instance, we don't have to know too much about his life, except as to complete an understanding of his legacy. In other words, his legacy is his tome, the Sahih of Bukhari, and it has left a monumental impression upon our intellectual legacy, no doubt about that. But Bukhari, the person who hailed all the way from Central Asia, is not significant in telling that story. If you want to tell the story about the Sahih of Bukhari, you don't have to pay close attention to the path that Imam al-Bukhari undertook himself. That's important to understand. Imam al-Shafi'i, yes, you have to pay attention to Imam al-Shafi'i, because he was this wandering scholar who went from place to place, and his movement from place to place affected his understanding and practice of Islam. But he is eclipsed by his students, so to speak. Although there are centuries that separate them, Imam Ghazali is actually called Al-Shafi'i Thani, the second Shafi'i, both because of his massive contribution to Islam's legacy, but also because, in my opinion, in the path he chose, in the way his life inserts itself into his scholarship. That's the point I want to make. The extent to which the individual's life inserts itself into its scholarship. I think of one scholar in India who's also had that same experience, and his name is Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan. He left a huge legacy, and much of that legacy is predicated on Sir Sayyid's own life, his background, his movement, his travels overseas, his interaction with people. And in other words, without that, there wouldn't be that legacy. In the case of Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, that's not the case. In the case of Imam al-Ghazali, it's all about him. All that he says about Islam actually flows through him. It flows through his life. It's someone who experienced this, who reacted to it, who built upon it. And so it's a very different kind of legacy. So we spent some time looking at that. Today, if we have time, we will look at the structure of the Ihya itself and what it's made up of. For now, before I get into the text of the Kitab al-Uzla, I want you just to make the point that perhaps the Ihya can be best described as the crossroads where the masses meet the intelligentsia. The ulama and the awam come together at the Ihya. it's a book that attracts the attention of the general population as well as scholarship. That's what makes it so interesting. It's also a place where you find the various aspects that go towards making the perfect Muslim are all encapsulated. They're all brought together. And we'll see that when I describe the Ihya to you. But for now, I want to talk about this uzla and the way Ghazali presents the arguments. Remember, last week we spoke about personalities who were inclined for it and others who are against it. Today we look at the arguments they present and the way in which Ghazali dismantles it. He is a taxonomist par excellence. He has this crazy ability to take things and break them down into their minutiae, analyze it, and then give his judgment on it. So he might be inclined to the left or the right, but when he deals with the matter, he does so very objectively. He does so very objectively and presents the arguments. And so when he starts here, you know, in good Muslim tradition, he says people who make the argument in support of being Sahbis, part of the community. Remember we said there's people who are part of Uzla and people who are part of Sahba. Sahba means being inclusive, being socially engaged. Uzla means being socially disengaged. What does the social disengagement mean? What are its ramifications? How does it present itself outside this particular condition? Here we are simply talking about that single individual who is trying to do what? Get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one. Run away from his shortcomings, two. And embellish, shine, and bring light to the good within him. In one surah of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Remember that verse? فَأَلْهَمَهَا. The nafs is imbued with a propensity towards evil and a propensity towards good. فَأَلْهَمَهَا. Yeah, Allah did this. He put within you the fujur and the taqwa. And now you are, with your aql and the wahi and the irshad and the ilham, you are supposed to navigate this. So this is what is meant by running away from the fujur and running towards the taqwa and embellishing and brightening your soul. So he does this, Imam al-Ghazali does this by reference to the Quran, and he says those who are partial to social participation bring forward this one verse. He says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا. They say, be not like those who split and then had differences of opinion. In other words, splitting, therefore, is not good. And when you engage in uzla, then you are in fact splitting from the community. That's what Ghazali said. This is a verse of the Quran they cite against those who prefer seclusion. He says, well, وَهَذَا ضَعِيفٌ. And he says, no, this argument is weak. Remember, you must have heard that hadith is da'if, hadith is not da'if. When he uses the word da'if, he's not talking in the hadith context. He is simply talking about the strength of the argument. The opposite of da'if here will be qawi, strong. The opposite of da'if in hadith studies would be sahih, authentic, inauthentic. So he says, this is not, this argument is weak. Why? لأن المراد به تفرق الآراء واختلاف المذاهب في معاني كتاب الله وأصول الشريعة, and so on. He says because what the Quran is speaking about is not the seclusion of the individual per se. It's talking about having differences of opinion and breaking up into schools and so on in your interpretation of the Quran and the principles of the Sharia. And he says, therefore, it doesn't apply. And then he goes on to the next one. And this is the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, "Man faraq al-jama'ata shibran, khala'a rabaqat al-Islam an unuqihi." So whosoever moves away from the community, even by an arm's length, a small distance, it's like somebody who's taken off the bonds that bind him. Okay, that verse of the Quran. Okay, let's see if I can find it. ولا تكونوا كالذين تفرقوا واختلفوا. Is anyone? I will find it, inshallah. So he says, whosoever breaks away from the Jama'ah is taking off the bonds that bind him to the Ummah. Remember, big part of the Jama'ah is very important. And then there's the other one that says, "Man faraq al-Jama'ah," whosoever separates himself from the Jama'ah and he dies, فَمَاتَ فَمِيتَتُهُ مِيتَةً جَاهِلِيَّةً, then he's died in as if he has died during the time of the Jahiliyyah, that period of ignorance prior to Islam. And so here he is saying something else. Understand one thing, Ghazali is writing this and he's saying things that also reflect not just his time, but a particular tradition in Islam. For those who are somewhat familiar with Islamic history, and we did touch upon this previously, we went through various iterations in which we had differences of opinion. For instance, about who should be successor to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then who is preferable, is it Ali or Abu Bakr? And then there's a whole question about whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us total free will, or he's the creator of evil and good, or only good. These are various points that we had differences of opinion about. So he's mindful of that. And when he brings these arguments, you must look at them in that light. Here's a man who is telling you these things, but who is fully focused on the history of Islam itself. So when this verse this hadith is recited about not breaking away from the Jama'ah, this particular hadith was repeated endlessly during those times. And it's one of the hadiths that prompted the establishment of what you and I today call Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And therefore, anyone who is not part of the Ahlus Sunnah has broken away from the Jama'ah. So it's a very serious consequence, because if he broke away from the Jama'ah, then according to the hadith, then what happens to him? Mata mitat al-jahiliyyah. He has died in a state of Jahiliyyah. So when anyone lays claim to be part of the Ahlus Sunnah, understand, if he's trying to excommunicate you, throw you not out of Islam, but out of the Ahlus Sunnah, then he is implicitly assigning you to those groups that belong to the Ahlul Jahiliyyah. So that's the message within the message, so to speak. And Ghazali says, no, here we are talking about a Jama'ah that is agreed upon. And they have a single Imam. Another big issue. If there's one thing we were never able to provide in our political thought processes, was the process of succession in leadership. We still don't have, and for that you can even look at the latest writings by scholars. I don't know what has come out in the past 25, 30, or even 50 years, but until modern times, Muslim society or Muslim law never had a system that, for instance, you have in America, where we failed miserably in doing what to his honorable, the honorable president. We failed to impeach him. Remember that? right? The point I'm making is not our failure, which is lamentable, but I'm making the point that American law actually has a system in place to remove leaders. We don't have a system in place to remove leaders. And that is a colossal problem. So we either had a civil war in which one part of the state defeated the other, and then the leader would go off into exile, or he would be killed, and so on. What happens if there's malfeasance on the part of the leadership? There's no succession. There's no mechanism in place to have him removed. There's no system to try him for that. So, as a consequence of this weakness, and we would, inshallah, sometime in our lives, we'll talk about that in greater detail. But as a consequence of that, we've had every time we had a leadership change, it came about in a manner that was messy, problematic, messy and problematic. And Ghazali is saying, yeah, that's why he makes the point. So listen to the point he says. He says, المراد به الجماعة التي اتفقت آراؤهم على إمام بعقد البيعة. He says the jama'ah that this hadith is talking about is a jama'ah where you have unanimity and where people have paid allegiance to an imam. That's the jama'ah he's talking about. You have unanimity and people have paid allegiance to an imam. In such a case, if you break away from the imam, if you adopt uzla, seclusion, then that would be called a treasonable act. That's what he's pointing out. So we start off talking about a very simple thing about which is preferable to the individual, to be in seclusion or to be part of the group. And suddenly you find absolutely new areas opening up, and they're all part of the same text. So when he's talking about this, he's reflecting upon a certain particular status quo that existed. Here's another one. You go into all kinds of alleys and avenues with Imam Ghazali and the example they give. He says, واحتج بنهيه صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الهجر أو هجر فوق ثلاث. You know this hadith, that a Muslim should not stop talking or shun another Muslim for more than 3 days. You see? Got it? من هجر أخاه فوق ثلاث فمات دخل النار. Said if you shun your brother or sister for more than 3 days, and he would die in that process, in that state, you enter Jahannam. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا يحل لمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاث. It is not permissible for a Muslim to shun his fellow Muslim for more than 3 days. Okay? And those who are for social integration and involvement, they say, al-uzlatu kal-hajri. That uzla is exactly like abandonment or shunning. But Imam al-Ghazali says, لا, لأن المراد به الغضب على الناس. He says the element of anger must be in there. There must be an element of anger. You understand? And then he makes an interesting point. He says, الهجر فوق ثلاث جائز في موضعين. It is permissible to shun someone for more than 3 days under the following, for two reasons. أن يرى فيه استصلاحا للمهجور في الزيادة. Is where you see benefit for the person being shunned for more than 3 days. And he's going to come up with some fascinating examples. Or number two, where you see benefit for yourself. And this applies so much to us in America, to stay away from people for more than 3 days. So shunning in and of itself is not necessarily bad if it fulfills three requirements. One, it's not based on anger, just mere anger. You had a fight with someone, you ticked off, and all right, I'm done with you. So that's not permissible. The other is where you want to do something to rectify, to restitute someone who has misbehaved, or where you find circumstances are such that you cannot but live an Islamic life except in a state of seclusion. So these are the three things he talks about. And then he says, وروى عمر أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم اعتزل نساءه وآلى منهن شهرا. This is in the Quran, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam shunned all of his wives for an entire month. Okay? And that's a fascinating story itself. But I want to go to the next example he gives. And Aisha radiallahu anha says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam where's this hadith? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he shunned one of his wives for an extremely long period of time. And this was Zainab bint Jahsh, I think. He shunned her for a long period of time because she uttered words that were clearly anti-Semitic. One of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's wives was actually a Jew, and her name is Safiya bint Huyay. So she lost an animal, died. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam comes to Zainab radiallahu anha, and he tells her, this woman's lost an animal, and you got one there, give it to her. فقال أنا أعطي تلك اليهودية. He says, I must give my animal to this Jewish woman, to this Jew. فغضب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فهجرها. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam became annoyed, and then he shunned her. And for many, many days. So here clearly, you have a question? No. Here clearly, you want to, perhaps you want to punish the person, but you also want to rehabilitate that person. I'm sure that this hasn't gotten to us, so I don't have any hadith to support what I'm saying. I'm sure Rasulullah sat down and he said, well, Zainab, that kind of an attitude is not very Islamic. It's very unbecoming of you. You are the mother of the faithful. I'm just surmising that this is probably what transpired, and because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is clearly trying to reform her in terms of that shortcoming. Then that's an example of where somebody is shunned because you want to rehabilitate that particular individual. Aisha then relates another hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, لا يحل لمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاثة أيام إلا أن يكون ممن لا تؤمن بوائقه. Interesting one. So it's not permissible for you to shun someone except if you are incapable of avoiding that person's bad habits. So you go to a gathering and Mr. X is there, and every time Mr. X sits down with you, then he is gossiping about the people in the community. And you're trying very hard, your darndest, so to speak, to reform yourself and purge yourself of backbiting, riba, and so on. And Mr. X wallows in it, and so what can you do? So he says, in that case, you shun him. But I think this is not quite applicable because that first element, the element of anger, is not there. It's not like you and Mr. X had a tiff of some sort that prompted you to break ties with him. Yeah, you still smile at him if you meet him, Assalamu alaikum, brother, you're doing well, and you move on. But you no longer maintain that kind of warmth. So that's what he's taught. فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ لَا يَدُومُ إِلَى الْمَوْتِ. So very interesting. إلا أن يكون ممن لا فهذا صريح في التخصيص وعلى هذا ينزل قول الحسن رضي الله عنه. I think this is Hassan, the son of Ali رضي الله عنه. هجران الأحمق قربة إلى الله. He says, to shun an idiot is one way of going closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She says, Hajran al-ahmaqi qurbatun ila Allah. And you come across them all the time. So what do you do with them? Well, you have to show them your best behavior. You have to smile, you have to be nice, and you have to move on. Those three things all the time. You have to smile, you have to be nice, and you have to move on. Sometimes you can't help it, but for the most part, move on. It's a wonderful lesson you can learn. That move on, and always remember what Hassan radiallahu anhu said: "Hajran wal ahmaqi qurbatun ila Allah." One way to get closer to Allah is to avoid that. Perhaps you want to include in that entertainment that is nothing but idiocy, and there are certainly. I'm not going to tell you that all forms of entertainment are haram and you should avoid them like the plague. But clearly you should ask yourself, what spiritual, intellectual benefit will I be deriving in engaging in this particular form of entertainment, knowing full well that I would first of all be, engaging with someone who is idiotic, but also because the most valuable thing Allah has given us, the most valuable thing, is time. It's the most valuable thing Allah has given us. And time wasted is never regained. And you and I know that. Haris is almost there looking at some of the strands in his hair. Then when you get to this, he says, you just look back and he says, good God, man, I could have spent my time doing far better things than that. But, you just become so obsessed with it, and before you know it, time has passed you by. So this is important too. And then, there were scholars, for good reason or bad. Listen, Islam has a very interesting hierarchical system to look at what is called isma. Yeah, who is blameless and who is blameworthy, who has the capacity to sin and who doesn't. So we say the Anbiya and the Rusul fall into that category. Everyone else is prone to good and is prone to evil. Or in the words of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, hum rijal wa nahnu rijal. They're men and we are men. They're human beings, we are human beings. So they might do a lot of great things, and they might falter on an occasion or two. So Imam Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi, a great scholar of Islam, he gives examples of this. He says, هذا شيء قد تقدم فيه قوم. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu. These are all Sahabis now. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas was shunning Ammar ibn Yasir. I don't know what the details of their tiff was, but there was a tiff there. وعثمان ibn Affan رضي الله عنه كان مهاجرا عبد الرحمن ibn Auf. So Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf and Uthman radiallahu anhu had some kind of a disagreement to the extent that they avoided each other. And more well known than that is that Aisha radiallahu anha avoided Hafsa. Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr avoided Hafsa, the daughter of Omar. Okay, so Imam al-Ghazali, he ends that with a very interesting, safe comment. He says, وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ يُحْمَلُ عَلَى رُؤْيَتِهِمْ سَلَامَتُهُمْ فِي الْمُهَاجَرَةِ. So all of this should be predicated on the belief that when they avoided each other, they did so in their best interest, and says, well, it's best that we make salam perhaps and move on. You know, perhaps there's just so much bad blood between us, and recently, you know, we've had some very nasty experiences in the Southeast Michigan area where, you know, things got out of hand, and maybe inshallah Allah will reconcile their hearts. We make this kind of dua, but hearts are not easily reconciled. They're not easily reconciled. So in that situation where, you know, you unfortunately you might, God forbid, you find yourself in that, what you must do nonetheless is greet and respond to the greeting and move on. You cannot simply walk away without either greeting or responding to the greeting. So this is the fact that you're shunning someone doesn't mean that you are free from greeting people. You should extend the salam and you should respond to salam. Any questions?
Well, Imam Muneer, obviously there's some nuance there. You know, the element of ghadab being there, of course, you know, that's clear. But this situation that you talk about, I mean, it's, you know, I think it's a fine line. Obvious, you both know, I think there's a mutual understanding. There has to be a mutual understanding that you will come to blows, or, you know, that you will cause more harm. But, you know, how it's similar to having ghadab for each other, though, towards each other, I mean.
And you know, there's certainly anger, and I don't think anger has the same endurance as our other emotions, and those are pain and sadness. Sure. And so I'll give you an example from the great master himself. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had many uncles, but the one he loved perhaps the most, one of two, was Hamza and Abu Talib. Hamza, unfortunately, radiallahu anhu, was killed in battle. And he was killed by a Sahabi, subsequently, whose name was Wahshi. And he was commissioned, Wahshi was commissioned by Hind, the daughter, the wife of Abu Sufyan. And she paid him a huge amount to target Hamza and kill him. And he did so. So Habashi accepts Islam. And then he comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam very nervous. This particular story is poignant and very, very instructive, and unfortunately we've lost sight of it. It points to the humanity of the Prophet. You know, we focus so much on the spirituality of the Prophet that it almost effaces the fact that within that heart was a heart, and it was an organic heart. It was flesh and blood. It had sentiments. It had feelings like you and I have. It's that point at which you and I can relate to that. The point at which that brother who can do no more than greet you, he cannot speak words with you, but because Islam requires of him that he shake your hand at least or greet you, that he will do that much and move on. Then understand that the greatest master amongst us, he too drew a line. So this Wahshi comes and he accepts Islam, and he accepts Rasulullah as his messenger. And he's nervous, knowing full well that he had hurt Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam deeply. And Rasulullah says, "Come on hither, and I accept your Islam, and I accept your tawbah. But looking at you reminds me of the pain I suffered when my uncle died. looking at you reminds me of what you did to him. Now listen to what Rasulullah says. He says, please try and stay away from me in the future. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. How is Wahshi going to handle that? How is a human going to handle someone who accepts Rasulullah as the messenger and who wants to do nothing but look at Rasulullah and wants nothing but Rasulullah to look at him with approval? Is going to live the rest of his life that with Rasulullah in this kind of barzakh, in this kind of animation where he is, whenever he sees Rasulullah, he is to give way. When everyone else is flocking towards him, he has to move away. And that speaks to the humanity of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not a weakness. Being human is not being weak. In our theological debates about whether Rasulullah is made of nur, or whether he is celestial, or whether he is earthly, and so on, we forget that being human is a precious element of the human being itself. And there's nothing that is demeaning about that. Not the pain we suffer, not the anger we sometimes unleash. All of those things go towards making us human beings. And the best example of that was this particular incident between Wahshi radiallahu anhu and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Notwithstanding Wahshi's unfortunate and predicament, he is still greater than the greatest wali that walked the face of the earth because of his sahbah, because of his companionship with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Any questions? No?
Does the Prophet ﷺ's recommendation, is it meant to serve as just general guidance, but specifics of a situation may allow for more than that? I think you, yeah.
Yes, the situation certainly allows for that. We will be coming to that. Because now we move on to the next section, ذِكْرُ حِجَجِ الْمَائِرِينَ إِلَى تَفْضِيلِ الْعُزْلَةِ. The arguments of the proponents of seclusion. And so again, it starts in the classical Islamic tradition. You start with the Quran, and then you go to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you go into what scholars have to say. He says, and here the proponents of interaction have sound Quranic arguments, but so do the proponents of uzla or seclusion. Because so many parts of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَعْتَزِلُكُمْ وَمَا تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. This is Ibrahim alayhi salam, who gets no joy talking to his people about the futility of worshipping idols. And he says, I'm shunning you and all that which you worship besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, this shows that uzla is a meritorious act. And Ghazali says, وَهَذَا ضَعِيفٌ. But he says this argument is weak. إذ لأن المخالطة مخالطة الكفار لا فائدة فيها إلا دعوتهم إلى الدين. He says because here we're talking about interacting with and being part of a community of disbelievers. Unless you have the intent of inviting them towards Islam or inviting them towards that which is good, there's no benefit in engaging with them. It's a very harsh argument that he makes, but that's the basis of his argument. He says, when Ibrahim alayhi salam says, I am shunning you, it's the right thing to do. I spent so much of my time trying to convince you about the futility of your idol worship to no avail, so best that I should shun you. So, what Ghazali is saying, that this is actually the norm. Spending time with them is the exception. That's the point he's making. The exception is to interact with them, but only with a view to bringing them towards Islam or helping them live better lives? That's what he responds.
I think it's significant, though, Imam Muneer, isn't that that was his father he was actually talking to right?
Yes, yes. Amongst those people, that's right. But again, you like you said, nuances. With your father, your seclusion will not be the same as with your neighbor. With your neighbor, the seclusion would not be the same as someone who lives a distance away from you. Your neighbor, despite his polytheism or his bad behavior, he still has certain rights over you. Beyond simple, hi, how are you? You are his first port of call if he is in danger, if he has need. And Islam imposes upon you the responsibility of helping without any quid pro quo. And that's your neighbor. And obviously with your father, there's a whole area of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very clearly with regard to your parents, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that ihsan there is graphically described. And understand one thing, when the Quran speaks about social relations or matters of law, it does so referentially. In other words, it does so quickly. Salah is not mentioned in detail. Zakat is not mentioned in detail. Hajj is not mentioned in detail. But the things that matter most to Allah are matters that affect other human beings, like the laws of marriage, the laws of succession, the laws of inheritance, the obligations that you have towards your parents. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this graphically, and that underscores the importance of it. Notwithstanding, as in the case of Ibrahim alayhi salam, notwithstanding the fact that they lived in the house of light where Ibrahim was, and they were still blind to it. They were still blind to it. Rasulullah himself was inclined towards this. There's a very interesting hadith. It says, وَرُوِيَ أَنَّهُ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ لَمَّا طَافَ بِالْبَيْتِ. He made tawaf around the house. عَدَلَ إِلَى زَمْزَمْ يَشْرَبَ مِنْهَا. So then after like it's the sunnah, when you're finished with your tawaf, then if you can, drink some zamzam, because Rasulullah did so. فَإِذَا التَّمَرُ الْمُنْقَعُ فِي حَيَاضِ الْأَدَمِ وَقَدْ مَغَذَهُ النَّاسِ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ وَهُمْ يَتَنَاوَلُونَهُ مِنْهُ وَيَشْرَبُونَ. And there was some date juice there, where he went to drink the water. And this was juice that what they did at that time was they take the date, they would crush it with their hands. In other words, they would be physically connected to it. Listen to this hadith. So they would, something that you and I see, unless it's your mother doing this, anyone else using their bare hands cooking and you see it, right? With your wife too, I mean, Shireen, she's probably listening in, so I'm going to have to make that exception. So, listen to this. فَقَالَ الْعَبَّاسِ Abbas, so Rasulullah goes to the date juice and he says, "Isquni." So give me some. So Abbas is standing there, he says, he's got people's hands in there and they've been mixing on it and so on. He says, إِنَّ هَذَا النَّبِيذَ شَرَابٌ قَدْ مُغِثَ وَحْقِيضَ بِالْأَيْدِي. He says, Ya Rasulullah. Abbas, his uncle, talking to him. He says, this thing's been mixed with people's hands here. أَفَلَا آتِيكَ بِشَرَابٍ أَنْظَفُ مِنْ هَذَا. I'll get you something that's cleaner. So these people were conscious of this. أَفَلَا آتِيكَ بِشَرَابٍ أَنْظَفُ مِنْ هَذَا. Something that's cleaner than that. فَقَالِ اسْقُونِي. Rasulullah says, no, give me the stuff. مِنْ هَذَا الَّذِي يَشْرَبُ مِنْهُ النَّاسِ. From that which everyone else is drinking. And this is what he says. أَلْتَمِسُ بَرَكَةَ أَيْدِي الْمُسْلِمِينَ. He says, I want the barakah of the hands of the believers. That's what I want. فَشَرِبَ مِنْهُ. All right? The very interesting one he then talks about is the one in Surah Al-Kahf. Again, the nuances that you spoke about. وَإِذَا اعْتَزَلْتُمُوهُمْ وَمَا يَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ فَأْوُوا إِلَى الْكَهْفِ يَنْشُرُ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ. This is in Surah Kahf. And then when you have shunned them, left, remember, you know the story, right? Where these young men, إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ, they were young people. And they could not deal with the social norms of their era. So they left. The fascinating thing about the story, which is not always mentioned, is these individuals were, first of all, they were very young. Secondly, they were not actually inspired by any kind of revelation. They had within them that spark, which we believe exists in all human hearts and bosoms, that points you to the right way. So that's why he said, so this is one of those young people talking to that. He says, let's go away from this place, go to a cave and worship Allah there. Amarahum bil uzza. And then it comes to that part that, what's his name? Who was with us? I don't know if he's with us today again. What is his name? Astaghfirullah. Anyway, he brought our attention to it.
Nasr.
Yeah, Nasr Griwa. وقد اعتزل نبينا صلى الله عليه وسلم قريشا لما آذوه وجفوه. And Rasulullah shunned the Quraysh. You know, that migration to the cave is not given the kind of attention it ought to. Because this was a man who was seeking solitude and seeking guidance. But he was also avoiding the immorality and the iniquity of Meccan society. When Rasulullah goes to the cave, he does so by his own volition. It's not like Allah directly asked him, go to the cave and something's going to happen there. And he had been doing that repeatedly. So he was already on that trajectory, he was already on that path, seeking that kind of guidance. Finding that kind of solitude, finding that kind of solace in solitude, in uzla. So he chose uzla. And Allah then forced upon him suhbah. Says, no. And in the Quran, he says, Ya ayyuhal muzammil, qum al-layl. Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir. Get up and start. Give up uzla and go into suhbah. In Surah Muddathir, that's very, very clear. The Rasulullah is being told, give up the uzla, it's now time to get into suhbah. Because with suhbah comes all of the, what Islam calls bawa'iqun nas, all of the really uncomfortable, unpleasant things that confront you when you get into it. And I make this point, and there's so much to be said about this particular migration to the cave. An entire seminar should be, and I say this because nobody actually does that what prompted Rasulullah to make that move in the first place? So, you know, that I call that the Buddha movement. And I say this advisedly because I don't want to compare Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Buddha, astaghfirullah. I'm not saying that. But there was someone there as well who tried to find, you know, guidance and soul satisfaction beyond the material well-being of his life. In the case of Gautama Buddha, who according to some very, very prominent people like Sayyid Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, was perhaps a Nabi in his own right. But he had to abandon, and last week we spoke about this great Sufi who gave up his palace in order to find guidance. But I want to contextualize this kind of the need to get involved in an unpleasant environment. And I say this in light of a documentary that was very popular about 10 years ago, I think, if not longer, and it was titled Unmasked. And what Unmasked did was it didn't advocate Uzla entirely, but it advocated a kind of elitism that I objected to from its very beginning. That you want to separate yourselves from the taxi drivers and the ammus and the uncles whose behavior is really problematic. And I'm the first to admit it. I mean, I had to deal with this firsthand. So I'm fully in sympathy with him. But it's not quite the spirit of Islam. And in fact, it's even worse than Uzla. Uzla is acceptable under the circumstances we discussed so far. But this kind of unmasking where you move from an integrated space where, ek hi saf mein khade ho gaye Mahmoud Ayaz, where Mahmoud and the slave, they stand together. That's the beauty of Islam. It's also the discomfort of Islam. I don't for one moment want to take away from the fact that Ayaz is standing there. Ayaz is standing next to Mahmoud, and Ayaz doesn't smell good. And Mahmoud just has to tolerate it. Remember the picture they had of those somewhat unwieldy, ugly toes knocking against each other? That's very graphic of the kind of community we find ourselves in. We are a community of people that reflect two different cultures. We are sophisticated, we speak excellent English, we go to the best colleges, we're very refined, we play the harp, we may play the cello, we appreciate the refined things in life, and then we're taxi drivers. We're hustlers in New York City, and we are who we are. It's what makes us Muslim. And we have to help each other. Now, I can't talk to the taxi drivers. God knows it's very hard. But I've been trying since this dawned, this whole idea of unmasked dawned upon me. I've been trying to tell people that, occasionally you might want to have some breathing space where you can get away from this. But for the most part, you have to create a strategy of getting involved in a masjid, performing your salah, and coming out of there. But because this kind of separation leads to an elitism that doesn't bode well for Islam in the future. Any questions?
There's a few, Imam Muneer. Let me take. So Irfan Murtaza is asking, Salam, how would situations be handled when seeking uzla, when one can benefit someone, but the latter may, but not necessarily, bring the former down spiritually? Is there an obligation or encouragement to help given the risk? I think it's a risk.
Wonderful question.
Yeah.
Wonderful question. No two people are ever on the same plane. One is always higher than the other. It's just, there's always someone higher than the other. The challenge for you is, do you have the strength, assuming that you are sitting on a higher plane, do you have the strength to put your hand down and pull that person up? Because he certainly has gravity to his advantage to pull you down. You understand the metaphor now? So if no two people are on the same plane ever, then the tendency is either to pull someone up or to be pulled down. You have to ask yourself, do I have the capacity to pull this person up? If not, then you have to exercise uzla. You cannot engage with such a person because he will or she will eventually drag you to their level. It's a tough thing to do, especially if you're married to each other. It's a tough thing to do if you're two brothers. It's a tough thing to do if you're child and parent. where someone is aspiring to something higher, and the other person is going to hold him back. And always understand the other person has gravity to his advantage or her advantage. They can easily pull you back. And it's a lot easier to be at the bottom than it is to be at the top. The discipline required to be at the top is much greater. The way, just take time management. Anyone who has acquired anything has also mastered the art or the technique of time management. Time management is not an easy thing to get right. But if you don't have time management, you have no success, period. You have no success. And most people fail because they cannot manage their times. They cannot manage their times. I read sometimes of short biographies of great achievers, Muslim and non-Muslim. The thing that is right up on the top is their ability to manage their times. If there's one thing we can teach our children, is that the most important thing Allah has given you is time, and the most important thing you can do with it is create a grid, create some kind of a system where you can manage your time. There is certainly a time for to do good things, but there's also a time for you to do things that are serious. And that's exactly where you're going to be having this tug of war between people that you otherwise love and cherish.
Yeah. You know, Zain is commenting on that to say you have to be honest about working against that gravity in another person before you give up. You have to make an honest effort. Otherwise, it can just become an excuse and maybe leading to the elitism that you mentioned when it comes to
Exactly. That's something you have to check yourself with every person. It's a tough thing. But every time you do that, every time you decide, should I hold this person's hand and pull him up? Or is it time to let go? That is all part of your ibadah. All of that is your ibadah. Is it time to hope, to hold on to this person? Is there hope yet? Or am I too weak to do this? There are other people who can help. You're not the only one who's there to help. Others can do that. What you have to worry about is, do you have the capacity to pull him up? If you don't, then it's best that you let them go. But not in a way that would ultimately lead you into another kind of blight, which is elitism.
Sure. And Zain had another good question, and you had alluded to it. Maybe you'll go into it deeper later. But how do these examples relate to Imam Ghazali himself, his own retreat and seclusion from the community?
No, let's not talk about that. Ghazali he's at the crossroads of something. I want to spend a lot of time on Ghazali.
Yeah.
I didn't even get into the book today. So next week what we'll do is we'll give you an overview of what the Ihya itself is made up of. And if we have enough time, then we'll talk. Not everyone is positively inclined towards the Ihya. There are many very prominent scholars who would advise you against it. And they have some serious criticisms against it. So we'll stop talking about the Kitab al-Uzla for now, and then look at the Ihya itself as a book, and then hopefully from that we can move on to talking about Imam Ghazali later on.
Okay.
And then go back perhaps to Kitab al-Siyam or something like that. Jazakumullah, thank you very much. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ.